And if you're a solo entrepreneur, you have to develop a leadership team, who can take this company on. And so you've got to develop leaders within your company that can continue to run it. I think one of the things I'm seeing, because we may acquire other companies, and so we're dating other companies, and I've seen poor financial statements. So following acceptable accounting practices when you're creating your financials is going to be really critical.
Welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast, where we discuss the latest trends and challenges facing the attractions industry today.
We chat with some of the top leaders in the field and provide resources that will help develop your career in this great industry.
I am Josh Liebman. I am obsessed with the guest experience and helping attractions make that their top priority for success.
And I'm Matt Heller. I am passionate about organizational effectiveness, leadership development, and employee engagement.
Now sit upright, hold on tight, and get ready for the Attraction Pros podcast.
Hey, Josh, how are you?
Hey, Matt, I'm doing really well. How are you?
I am fantastic.
Woo!
So great to be back here recording another episode with you. We've got a great guest today, but I've got a question for you.
Okay.
When you go to, let's say, a museum, what is it that pulls you in to an exhibit that makes you want to stand there or sit there or engage with that exhibit and really immerse yourself in the story that it's trying to tell you? What sort of draws you in?
Whew, what a question. Well, first, hopefully I have some interest or curiosity in the content, whether it is science, history, art, etc. And then what does it look like, right? How is it presented? Is there a lot of reading that I need to do, or can I look? Can I watch? Can I listen? Can I play with a cranky do? What is it that is going to get the information from the museum into my head that is going to resonate well and make me say, oh, this is a great exhibit and a lot to think about here.
Yeah. And I think I'm kind of similar in that way. The visual is what kind of draws you in a lot. And then where do you get the information? Is it from something you're hearing, or, something you're seeing on a screen, or something that you have to read? And I know for me, maybe I'm just a little impatient, but when I see a lot of text, a lot of words, if those first couple sentences don't really grab me, I'm like, I'm not sure if I want to keep reading the rest of it. And, part of that may be the way I've experienced museums in the past, where maybe there's people coming up behind me and I don't want to spend too much time, right, doing that and thinking that I'm going to, hold that hostage, that piece of information hostage, where somebody else can't come up and see it. But I think, for me, it's very similar. Like, I've got to be kind of engaged with that topic already. And hopefully whatever the overall overarching topic of that museum is, that's kind of what drew me in the first place. But then, for specific exhibits, there are things I think that will, trigger different things for different people. And that's what makes it so cool, is because there's so many different things that could be, great for mom or dad or little kids or people with, interest in certain parts of history or whatever. So I would also think that makes the exhibit designer's job that much more difficult.
Yes, I cannot imagine the challenge of designing exhibits, but we get to talk all about it today with Betty Brennan. She is the founder of Taylor Studios. She was the president until very recently. She is transitioning out of that role and taking on the founder and ambassador role of Taylor Studios, which designs exhibits for museums and attractions of various scopes and sizes.
And what I think is really cool about the story that Betty talks about is how it's not just about the creative side of the exhibit, but very much focused on the foundation of the business side, so that these creative minds can continue to create these things that look cool and engage you and draw you in, but also sustain a business so that you can keep doing that over and over and over again.
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely talk a lot about the art and the business side of exhibit design today, which is a very fascinating angle to look at it from, particularly as sometimes the business might put some guide rails or some walls around the capacity for the art creation, which ultimately creates more creativity than if there were no barriers or parameters around there. So we talk a little bit about that. We talk about the way that they deliver those stories by following the mission of the client that they're working with. So we talk about mission-based storytelling, which is really fascinating and something that I think a lot about as far as, well, how do you get the story to the most passive visitor? There's the person who comes in and they just want to check it all off the box and say that they did it. And then they might say, well, I thought there was going to be more. Well, there was more. You just zoomed right through it, right? And then we also talk even more about the business side, not just of exhibit design, but small business in general. And I think that this will definitely resonate with a good portion of our audience, particularly if you're working both on the operator or the supplier side of a business within the attractions industry, as far as what's your exit strategy? What happens after you are no longer affiliated with the business? So we cover a lot of that topic as well.
Yeah, and I think that's really fascinating the way Betty talks about all the, I'm sure we didn't cover all of them, but many different options, right, that people would have as an exit strategy, and something that we really should be thinking about, especially if you're a business owner and you're the one signing the checks and you're the one that maybe created the business. At some point, you're not going to be part of that business anymore. And what does that look like? She talks about the death and the drooling conversations. Like if she fell off a horse, what would you do in the business? And having those really critical conversations and having the process or the plan in place so that the transition, is not disruptive to the team, to the clients, and to the business in general.
Yeah, absolutely. So should we get to this interview with Betty Brennan?
Let's do it. Betty, welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We're so excited to have this conversation and learn more about you and Taylor Studios. Can you start it off by talking a little bit about you and kind of your history in the industry?
Sure. Yeah. So I started Taylor Studios 30 years ago. In my background, I have an MBA, so I'm the business side of an art creative business. And so I've been running the company as president since then. I co-founded the company with Joe Taylor. He was the artist. I was the business person. And so, yeah, I've been doing the sort of the business side of the business ever since. Yeah.
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 And so what led to that partnership to start Taylor Studios?
Yeah, it was a really humble start. We met in college, like he lived across the street. He was, the artist and I was the business, and we learned about this industry. When we were in college, he got a job working for a taxidermist, Gary Breeze, who is in our industry too, and they got a job to make trees for a nature center. And then we realized it was a whole industry, and we're like, holy cow, we can do this for a living. How cool is that? We're both very outdoorsy. I love nature, I love history, and so with that combination of business and art, it was a great place to start to maybe create a business kind of thing. So we met there, and went off and finished my master's degree. I don't know if you want the whole background. I'm going into like when I was 3.
As much as you want, sure.
Okay, yeah. And he worked for Chase Studio in the industry while I was in grad school, and we decided, and I had started another business then, writing interactive computer programs for museums and nature centers, and we decided at some point to combine our skills, the business side and the art side. And it was an extremely humble start. We started an artifact and fossil reproduction business, trying to get our name into museums. So we had a whole catalog, but we literally started on the kitchen table, a renovated chicken coop, the loft of the horse barn, kind of thing. Very humble, hacking our wares out of the back of a pickup truck kind of thing, so very, very humble, and slow start, as we bootstrapped our growth. But one of the things when I was in college studying business, that back then they didn't have as many entrepreneurial small business classes. So I was taking SBA classes at night, and I was reading Inc. magazine even back then. So as you know, maybe still a teenager, 20 years old, I told Joe, I'm going to make the Inc. 500 someday. And then Taylor Studios, roughly 10 years later, made the Inc. 500. So we were able to get off the kitchen table at some point and become, you know, a multi-million-dollar business. So that's the start of it. And, you know, now over 30 years later, you know, we've made the Inc. 500, the Inc. 5000 twice. And, you know, we have over 750 projects in 45 states and 4 countries. So we've got a massive portfolio and legacy of work that we've done as a company.
That's fantastic and such an excellent story. Thanks so much for sharing that with us. And I know that we want to dive deep into talking about kind of the components of exhibit design and talk about that as well. But first, I'm wondering if we can expand a little bit more on kind of the combination of art and business. Mostly, how often do those maybe bleed over into each other? As the business side, how much of the art side do you need to know? And then even over on the art side, how much the business aspect needs to flow into that as well?
Right. Yeah. And we call ourselves that, a combination of art and business, because I think we're different than a lot of creative art firms in that we had the business mind right from the start. You know, we certainly are known in the industry for our scenic work, our biological accuracy, you know, our creativity, our design. But I think what sets us apart is our processes. So in building that business off the kitchen table, I developed, you know, the process side of the business, and that, you know, project management, quality control, you know, standards and operating procedures and policies and, you know, the hiring practices, all that business stuff was also built. And I think what it brings for our clients is peace of mind. You know, they know we're going to communicate effectively. They know it's going to be collaborative. They know we're going to hit the schedule and the budget. And so it's that, I think, is different than I think a lot of the companies I see are started by the artist or the designer, not the business person. And so we see that as a unique aspect of Taylor Studios. They do cross over a lot, you know, and so you know, Jason Cox was our creative director, now VP of operations, because he's recently been promoted. But, you know, he knows the project management processes and you know, how to do 5S in the shop so that we're efficient in how we produce, so that our client, we have process boards that follow a component around the shop floor. And that's the communication from our client, because it's, you know, the picture that they sent us is on that board that follows the component. And so it crosses over a lot. Did that describe it? Does that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if we can go even further, maybe down that rabbit hole a little bit, and talk a little bit about the people that are, you know, kind of on both sides of those businesses. Because, you know, when you think about a business person and you think about an artist, they can have very, very different personalities and very different priorities. Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about how you've been able to maybe marry those two together or get them to work as cohesively as possible?
Right. Yeah. Right. It's left brain, right brain. Yeah. I used to joke, and maybe I shouldn't, is that, you know, artists have a lot of feelings and I'm very goal oriented and logical and, you know, that kind of stuff. And so it is a different type of people to work together. You know, so some of what we do, like one of the things is we study, have you studied DISC personality profiles?
We use it all the time. Absolutely.
Okay, yeah. So we all take that test and we all know each other, and we all know that all of us are different and it's okay. But how do we work? How do we communicate with a high D who's, you know, getter doner, that's, you know, zooming through the company? And I then have to learn how to slow down and have the conversation and be aware of their feelings. And so we coach and practice all of that. And so that's a lot of it. And, you know, we're very goal oriented. There's a lot of metrics set for each department. So that's one way that we can cross those boundaries. We have time goals for every component in the shop and in design. And so that helps cross it. I think, you know, it's just sort of, how do you bring the groups together? You know, we have coffee and donuts, you know, once a month on the shop floor to make sure that the administrative and design side are communicating with the production side. You know, weekly company meetings, it's that communication process, right? How do you get these two different types of people working together towards the same goal. And that's a leader's job, right? Is to get a group of people moving towards the same vision. So you have to work on those communication processes of, that cross different types of people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And what about challenges that really come with doing that? And kind of, like you said, it's that right brain, left brain type of mindset, and really that balance. Because on the business side, I can imagine it would be easy to say we can't spend money on that because it'll impact this from the budget itself. And then from the art side of that, and say no, like this is what will make it what it is, and and we would need to spend this extra money on that as far as that. And obviously that's just kind of a very generic perspective on that, but curious as far as looking at the business, but sometimes through the art lens, but also the other way around as well.
Yeah, once again, I do think it's those processes. The artists always want to create this art piece and keep going and keep going. And so when we have these time goals, it's okay, so this is what the client paid for, this is how we budgeted it through design, and it's sending those that documentation out to the shop floor, so that communication is out there, so they have the drawings and the goals of the project and the mission, and they're measured, you manage what you measure, so that helps. But it's also obviously listening to the creative side. You can't not have that, or we wouldn't be here. That's what the clients want from us. And so, it's a collaborative process with all the team members and the client. But you have parameters. It is working. Sometimes it's working within the box, not outside the box. And I think sometimes within the box, you can be more creative. You have some guardrails. And so we've, created those guardrails. And so now how can we give the client the best thing within these guardrails? And then that can be that can be a challenge, a creative challenge, and exciting, because then you got to brainstorm and come up with how do we create the best thing for our client within these guardrails.
Yeah, I've heard that concept before, where people talk about limitations, like you put limitations or guardrails on things, and it actually forces you to be more creative than you thought you would have been, because you can't be blue sky, right?
Right.
You've got to kind of keep it within the rail, so to speak. So can you talk a little bit about maybe the process, as Josh was talking about, kind of getting into, the exhibit design and, maybe the psychology behind it and how you bring people into that world. So what is sort of that process that you use at Taylor Studios?
One of the things is the interpretive design process, and that's been really impactful for us as a company, which we incorporated over 20 years ago. I can't remember because it's been 30 some years, but it's sort of a mission-based storytelling approach. And that drives our design. And so we start with the client. It's the story first before you create the 3D immersive experience. We want to know what is your central theme, your sub theme, and your storylines. And that's the guiding principle behind it all. It's almost like a company's mission statement. It's like you got to stay within that mission. And so if you're designing something for the prairie and somebody donates a polar bear, that tells you, no, you're not going to put the polar bear in there, unless there's some kind of compare and contrast kind of thing. But we use an interpretive design process. And so we start at the beginning with creating that story, getting approval from the story. And sometimes that's hard for the clients because they want the whiz bang drawings right out of the chute. And we're like, no, let's agree on the story first. The story drives everything. And so then it's just, as a gradual building up of the design. You start with the story, you move to thumbnails and like projects, and, you just develop those components over, our design process often takes more than a year, sometimes longer than that, depending on the size of the project or the scope of the project. And then it goes into construction detail, final graphic design, and then out to the shop floor for fabrication. And then the guys that fabricate also install it. So that's a brief overview of a 1.5 year long process. Sometimes we do fab only, and so then those go faster. We're known, like I said, we are known for our scenic work, so often others come to us to do that fabrication work for their projects that they've designed.
One of the things that I've always been curious about is communicating the story to even the most passive visitors. And I'll give some context to why I think about this every now and then. Is I do a lot of work with guest feedback and analyzing things like TripAdvisor reviews. And one of the things that I've seen, particularly in museums and aquariums, that one of the biggest complaints that they would get on TripAdvisor or on Yelp or Google reviews or whatever it is they would say, well, the aquarium is too small. And then they would follow that up and say, we were in and out in 45 minutes. And then you pull that back and you say, okay, well, they're not complaining about the size of the building. They're complaining that they just went through it, right? They just sort of plowed through and said, check, check, check. I saw all the exhibits and I left. Versus actually stopping and engaging with it. There's probably a lot more than if they would actually slow down a little and take their time through it. But it's also self-paced as well. So being able to take that mission, like you said, of the project, extract the story from it, and then deliver it not to the guest that says, I want to learn everything there is to know about this particular topic, but I want to visit the museum. I want to, I want to go, take my family and have a fun day out.
Yeah. I think the immersive experience is important. In engaging them. Also, as I mentioned, scenic is good. So for us, for instance, we created a life-size rebar woolly mammoth and paleo hunter for Horicon Marsh, and it attracts people from the road and brings them into the education center. And as far as impactful and passive, even if they don't read anything, which I would say don't have a lot of words in your design, they're going to know some history and some of the story. So we call those big wows, and so there's those big wow visual experiences that happen. And we create little wows too. So it might be a bird model, it might be, and those can help engage and inspire the visitor just by a visual. But I would say it's also, I think immersive is still really important. You want to transform the visitor to another time and place. You can't do that everywhere, budgets and so forth. But I think if you can create an immersive environment, that's going to be impactful. I think it being interactive is important so that you're engaging all the senses, whether it's just a cranky do or, high-tech AV type of experience. I think the more you can engage all their senses will, help the visitor not just be passive and zoom through. So it's all those things. It's the story. It's how you've laid it out as far as the visitor flow and them understanding that story. So that interpretive approach again. And so they aren't confused when they're going through a story, that they're at the end, they know that it's a flow through. So that's really important. Using a variety of media, I think, is important, not just static, graphics or things like that. Using a variety will also engage them. And so we've been fortunate enough to create a lot of big wows. There's another one. There's a giant red-tailed hawk nest in Lake County, Chicago area. That's an outdoor classroom, but the kids can put their head into this giant eagle nest and look out onto this ravine and see through how an eagle would see. So that's another example. Gettysburg, it's the cyclorama, is an immersive experience. Of course, not all our clients can afford that, but the more that you can do a variety of media, a variety of communication approaches, I think will help them not just passively zoom through.
And is cranky do, is that a special?
It's a technical term. Yeah. I hope I didn't go over your head.
I was gonna have to Google that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But one
mechanical, you can use a mechanical interactive versus a electrical versus a push button. I think using a variety is helpful.
I love that. No, and what that made me think of a little bit is kind of the difference of what I've seen, and I'm, not a museum expert, but what I've seen the difference between, for example, a children's museum and something that's, geared toward adults, where the children's museum it's all hands-on, right? Yeah. It's all things that they can do and touch and cranky do's and all these things. Yeah. And the adult ones, and maybe they, were designed many years ago or whatever, but it's a static display and a lot of words.
Yeah.
Right? And then where did we think the thought process stopped, that adults don't like cranky doos, right? And adults don't.
Right. Yeah, they do. I love cranky dudes.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I think that's really fascinating as you talk about, your mission-based storytelling and that flow and using all the different kind of media. I think that's really fascinating that I think there's opportunity out there still for some people that, are kind of in that, well, adults can read, so we're going to give them lots of words.
Yeah, who wants to go there to read a book? They want to go there for a unique experience.
Yeah.
And every client has a different story to tell. So it has to be a unique way that you're telling it, or they won't come. They want to go, especially the younger generation, they want an experience. And so you've got to use a multitude of approaches to tell that story. And yeah, who wants to go there and read a book, right? Yeah, it is hard though. Our clients love their subject matter and their content. So it is difficult sometimes to convince them to not have so many words. But that's our role as the expert advisor on this approach. So we try to avoid that.
Yeah.
Is part of the thought process though about there's what happens while they're in the exhibit. So there's the duration of the experience itself, but also to get their gears turning of they can go get a book afterwards. They can do that on their own time.
Right.
Or we have Google. If I want to
Yeah.
learn more about this hawk, I can search it, online and look at way more information that could fit on any signage in a museum on my own time. So is
Right.
there kind of that element of saying, I hear the term spark curiosity a lot,
Yeah.
and really trying to kind of assign concrete meaning to that, to say it's not just about while you're here, but it's what you're thinking about on the drive home.
Right. Yeah. And, the interpretive approach does include those goals, like what actions do we want the visitors to take after they leave? If they remember one thing, what is it when they leave? And we do a lot of nature related stuff. We do cultural history and all that. But, a lot of it is, maybe when I go home, I plant a milkweed so that I help the monarchs. And there usually is a mission-based objective that we want the visitors to take once they go home. And so that's part of creating the design, that you have that impact. Like, how can I now go change the world? Now that I've been to this really unique site that has showed me an eagle in a different way that I've never seen it before, what can I do to make the world a better place as a visitor to this place? I think almost all of our clients have that sort of objectives in mind, and we help them set those in that initial workshop. What are the objectives for the visitor after they leave this place?
And do you find, Betty, that the messaging of that is different depending on the facility? Like there could be some that's very explicit, like go do this, go plant that milkweed, versus we're going to let you experience the facility, and then if you are so inclined to do something, we're not going to tell you what to do, but go do something. Like is
Yeah.
that
Oh yeah,
different with different clients?
I think so. Yeah, I don't know that it's most of the time it's not as direct, like go plant a milkweed. It's more obscure. We did a project on Lincoln, and it was kind of this life review, and you walk through this sort of Alice in Wonderland. It was when he after he was shot and then he died, I think like 8 hours later. So it was like he was doing his own life review. So it was kind of wonky and stuff, and you went through his life and what he learned. But it was like live like Lincoln. So it was teaching people, here are his values, and you can have those values too. And you could walk away with a card of the one of the values you wanted to try to implement of Lincoln. So, completely different than go plant a milkweed. This is how you can live your life like Lincoln lived his, as an example of what they wanted to achieve with those visitors.
Okay.
Yeah. And now that really takes kind of the concept of an exhibit within a museum or within this facility, and really turning it into this is going to improve your life. This is going to make you a better person. So now we're kind of extending beyond experience into transformation, which I know is a topic of some conversations we've had in the past as well. Are there misconceptions around that? Around to say this is the goal. Using live like Lincoln as an example towards kind of creating that transformational experience? Or are there some things that some venues might not necessarily think from the forefront that perhaps they kind of need to have a little bit more of it uncovered?
Yeah, I don't know that all the clients have that type of aspiration, like I'm going to change your life. We did, recently in Fort Bend, Texas, it was more about local history. So it might not be changing your life, but, did you know that this happened here? And, it's more informational and awareness of that one, had a diversity stint, and some of the early explorers that came and changed the community, and they were African American. And so it's, it might awake you to other historical aspects that broaden your horizons as a visitor. Might not be, live like Lincoln and go change the values that you live by, but it's informative enough that makes you maybe a more open-minded person, as one example. So yeah, obviously every client is different, and their goals for, the visitor experience are different. And so if I think though, wow, if you can create that transformational experience, that's pretty, I would say that's successful, right? If you can have that impact on visitors, whether it's about history or nature, and you've clicked something with them and it makes them think about things in a different way, then that's a successful exhibit, I would say. And if they come back
And tell other people
and tell other people, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I'm wondering if we can switch gears just a little bit, because I know we wanted to get into talking a little bit about the business side and kind of small businesses and some advice that you have, because you've got experience with that. And thinking about, there's a lot of people that start a business like you did, right? And eventually they're not going to be part of that business anymore, right? Whether they sell it or they just close the business or whatever the case may be. So I'm wondering what some of the advice that you have or things that you've experienced over the years that might help people who are listening, who are running a small business and maybe even thinking about an exit strategy or what they should be doing, kind of to think about it more long-term.
Right. Well, I think that's the key, right? Do think long term. You need to plan your exit strategy way in advance, because maybe your first idea won't work like mine didn't. So I had plan A, B, and C. I had contingency plans. And, it's interesting. I was on our economic development board here locally, and they talked about how many baby boomers that own businesses that don't have an exit strategy. This could be a really hurtful thing both for our industry and just our general economy if all those baby boomers don't have an exit strategy and those businesses just shut their doors. That's a sad thing to lose. So, I would really encourage people to think about their exit strategy well in advance. And, I've read something like, people think about it at the last minute, and then there's a health issue or there's something like that. And now you've just affected your employees, your clients, and your community by not having planned this. So certainly encourage that. And I think having, those business practices in place is going to benefit you if you decide to sell, or if you, sell it to your employees or let some leaders take over. You have to have good business practices so the business can go on after you. And if you're a solo entrepreneur, you have to develop a leadership team, who can take this company on. And so you've got to develop leaders within your company that can continue to run it. I think one of the things I'm seeing, because we may acquire other companies, and so we're dating other companies, and I've seen poor financial statements. So following acceptable accounting practices when you're creating your financials is going to be really critical. I think having a contact database, so you have a list of all your clients, you have a book of work, you have processes in place so that if a new owner comes in, they can come in and run it fairly easily without being dependent on you. It can't just be in your head. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs forget to get that. You've got to develop process, procedure, standards, documentation, so that it's not in one person's head. That makes it really risky if you do that. And so I think all those things need to be thought about well in advance, and then where you're weak as a company, start developing those well in advance of the potential exit that you'll take as a small business owner.
Okay.
And it sounds like a lot of the guidance that you're giving here too, as far as these business practices, even if whether you're thinking about it as an exit strategy or even just operational procedures, I think this is good advice in general.
both, right? Yeah.
Of so many business owners who haven't taken a vacation in 20 years, because if they step away from it from a moment, then it's going to crumble because they haven't built the system around them to thrive, whether they're at the office or whether they're on vacation, whether they're out of the office in any way. So when you talk about kind of the exit strategy and selling the business, are those always synonymous with each other? Because I feel like there could be other exit strategies as well, whether it's selling the business or even if it's promoting the next in line, or kind of just otherwise business continuity beyond, you mentioned solopreneurs or even small business owners.
Oh, absolutely. I think there's many approaches to what that could be, and so you have to decide what works for you and your company. I had originally an intent. I had a consultant for 3 years help me teach my leadership team what it means to be an owner. And I thought I might sell to my leadership team. Well, that didn't turn out. They got to be willing to take the risk and put some hand in the game, and that didn't happen for me. So then I went out to the external environment and looked for the right buyer. I wasn't going to sell it to someone that was just going to flip it or not keep the staff on board or not keep our values and mission and who we were. I wanted it to go on as Taylor Studios. So then I put it out there for sale, and then that worked out. But I had plan C too. You can also do an ESOP. You can sell it to your employees. So you have to think that through, because plan one might not work, but there are a variety of options to not just shut the doors. I do think, though, if you look at the statistics, I think it's, don't quote me on this, but it's something like 90% of business just liquidate. They don't go on. So it's something that needs to be well thought out. And I think your point of, if you can't take a vacation, that's sort of a signal that you haven't set up your business in a way that it can operate without you.
Yeah. And I've worked with a number of family businesses, and, we talk about succession planning, and their idea of succession planning is having kids. And that's not necessarily
right. You never know how that's going to turn out.
Exactly. Maybe they don't want to be in the industry or whatever. So, I guess maybe, are there any thoughts or words of wisdom for family businesses who, maybe their plan A is for it to stay in the family, but maybe that's not the right way to go, or that's maybe not best even for the business?
I think, obviously be open-minded to that might not happen. They might not be the right person to run the business. If you're, I was very concerned about taking care of this. I have several 20-year veterans here. I want to take care of my employees. So you want to have the leaders that can do that well also, right? So I would say, have plan B and C. And I would think one of the things I think about myself as an entrepreneur that might be different than others is I've always been a long-term thinker. So I would think most entrepreneurs are. So this is one of the things you got to think about. It might be, we've even thought about, in the years that I did the business, I had what we called the death plan and the Drool plan. Because as the only owner of the company, what if I fell off a horse and I couldn't come into work? So I talked about that with my leadership team, and each of us had that. But I had my will and trust in place so that, my clients wouldn't be hurt either if something happened to me. I think that's our responsibility as business owners, to take care of our employees and our clients. And if you got to be able to talk about these. The people don't like to talk about it, right? They don't want to talk about their will, and I might die, or I might get hurt and I can't do my job. What are we going to do if that happens? And with the leadership team, it's important to talk about that too, because what are their wives going to, or partners going to expect if they get hurt and they can't work for 6 months? What do they expect out of the company? And so having those conversations so that it's really clear, so it's not a surprise when it happens, I think is a good thing, a good business practice too.
Yeah.
Having the uncomfortable conversations that you don't want to talk about just in case you do have to talk about them, or you
Yeah.
have to have those conversations one day. So it sounds like there's a lot of, I would say, importance of leveraging your skill set, or, I hear a lot of people struggle with delegation because they started the business because they're the best at this specific task. Do you have any tips or tricks for being able to do that? Like, for instance, I'm a huge fan of Tim Ferriss and the 4-Hour Work Week and that whole philosophy. So I'm feeling a little of those vibes there, but just curious as far as, best ways to be able to leverage and delegate.
Yeah, I think a leader has to, right? If you're going to grow, I mean, maybe if you're a 5-person company, but if you have ambitions to grow and you have a number of staff, you have to learn to delegate and let go and coach and mentor the people to be there. So I often told my leadership team, be, not do. You're not the doer. You're teaching other people to do. You're there to guide them. I mean, we're small enough, we all have to do, but it's sort of, it helps them think about it, be, not do. When that, that person might take longer to do it than you do it. It might not be the same way you've done it, but that's okay. And so that was part of the leadership training. We do coaching and stuff, is teaching the leadership team to develop the people under them. You must have people that will step into your shoes at some point, and that means you can't do everything. And we are trying to develop a knowledge database. Sometimes it's all stuck in Jason's head, and we got to get it out of his head. Even though I say that, it's still a struggle to get all this stuff out of the heads of the longtime people. And so we're developing a knowledge database. So we're documenting some of this stuff in checklists and where are things saved. And we'll start taking videos. So those are there. So people have a reference database where they can go see this stuff, but then they can make it their own.
Yeah. So Betty, a lot of what you've been talking about over the last 35, 40 minutes has been amazing to talk about leadership and businesses and things like that. I'm curious if you were either to go back to when you first started the business, or to give advice to someone, in that position of starting a business, what would that advice be, either to your former self or to somebody starting a business?
Yeah, I think, we're going to make mistakes, right? All along the way. So don't be too hard on yourself. I did in the early, and I had a coach. I was with the Vistas organization for a long time. So I got to meet with other business owners, because it can be a lonely position if you're the owner. And so I had this other group of business owners I could bounce ideas off of, and they would hold me accountable, and I had a coach and all of that. And one of the things I struggled with early, and this might just be dependent on you as an individual, but I would beat myself up when I made mistakes, or I made a management mistake, or I said something the wrong way. And that doesn't help anybody, and so just give yourself a break. If you make mistakes, that's going to happen. That's how you learn. I think, probably like everyone says, be a constant learner. I was constantly reading business or our industry information, Inc. magazine, business books, and apply what works for you. Be a constant learner. Effective communication is key. So one of the things we teach around here is a crucial conversations book. So we teach that across the company. So we encourage people to have the conversation. Don't not have it, don't avoid it. And then recently we started reading Radical Candor, and I shared some of that, and it's being, as a leader, you have to be an effective communicator. You have to be able to clearly spell out your expectations and hold people accountable. And if you're not clear, that's a poor leadership trait. So working on those communication clarity and how to communicate effectively is going to be good. I'd also say work on your own self-awareness. That might be emotional intelligence training. It might be go to therapy. But the better you know yourself, the better you're going to work with other people. And leadership is all about working with other people. So the more you know yourself, the better you're going to work with others. So yeah, I mean, in a brief sense, that's what I would recommend.
That's great advice. A lot of great advice.
Yeah.
So Betty, at the time of this recording, you've recently stepped out of the president role with Taylor Studios, and would love to know how that transition has been, as well as what's next for Betty.
Yeah, I obviously wanted to take care of this place. It's like sending your kid off to college, right? This is my baby. And so, I've it's been a slow transition of training the leadership, getting them ready, um, teaching them everything I can so that they're successful as they move into my shoes. And then now I'm, as of Monday, so just 4 days, I am not president. And so I call myself the founder and the ambassador, but I'm here still, reaching out to clients and things like that. So I'm here in case they need me. And so probably, in a month or so, I'll completely exit, still be the ambassador. I'll still have my email address with Taylor Studios and those kind of things. But then I am writing a book. I'm writing sort of a memoir on the journey with Taylor Studios. And so that's what I'll be working on. And I have a farm, so I get to have some more horse time, and I'm doing conservation work on the farm. And so it's sort of a sabbatical period where I'm working on my book and figure out who is Betty if I'm not Taylor Studios, which I haven't figured that out yet. So that's going to take some time for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
And a whole new world.
Writing a book certainly is a journey. I'm curious what inspired you to take your knowledge and your experiences and put it into that medium. There's obviously doing what you do at Taylor Studios, there's a lot of different ways to tell that story. I'm curious why a book? Yeah,
it was a life list thing. So I'm a goal achiever. So that was one of them, but I actually started it. Oh, maybe it's been 2 years. So, it's a slow process because I was just doing it here and there as I was running the company. And I think, so it was the life list thing. At that time, it was sort of to help Taylor Studios too, to get our name out there, some credibility, to use that as a speaking possibility, those kind of things, which it might still be, it'll still be to help Taylor Studios. I, always be cheering the company on. Now it's just sort of, this is my new thing. I don't necessarily think it's going to make money, but it's what I want to do with Betty's time is to learn. I've been writing a blog. Taylor Studios has a blog, so I've been doing that for over 10 years. So trying to develop my writing skills. I do have a writing coach. So, when you asked what advice would you give with people, I noticed I've had coaches all the way along. So I would encourage people to do that. Now it's a whole new genre for me. So I'm learning how to write. So hopefully it will help small business owners, and it will, it's a creative business. So it's not like product based, it's a small company. And I think a lot of the books out there are like Nike and Pixar, so here's how you can do it, this creative work, have a small business, but it doesn't have to be Nike. So I hope it inspires people that way too.
Excellent.
Awesome. Can't wait to read it.
Yeah.
Good.
Maddie, this has been such a fascinating conversation. As we start to wind down this interview here, if people want to learn more about Taylor Studios, or if they want to get a hold of you directly, where would you send them?
Yeah, well, certainly our website, taylorstudios.com. And we're on all the social networks, so you can find Taylor Studios on LinkedIn and Twitter and Instagram. Me too. You can find me on LinkedIn and Twitter. Eventually I'll have my own author website, so you can look for that someday. Working on that now. But encourage everybody to go to Taylor Studios website.
Awesome. Very good. Well, again, Betty, thank you so much for your time. This, like Josh said, this has been a wonderful and fascinating conversation. And for everybody out there and listening, just remember, we are all attraction pros. Thanks for listening to the Attraction Pros podcast.
Make sure to subscribe so you can tune in when new episodes release. And even better, please leave us a review on iTunes.
For more information, visit attractionpros.com.